Good afternoon. My name is Suzanne Tripp, and I chair the Grandmothers Against Gun Violence Board of Directors. I'd like to welcome you all to our final quarterly program for 2023. We have a stellar group of legislators joining us today for our preview of the 2024 legislative session, and our moderator, Nancy Sapiro, will introduce them in a minute. But first, I'd like to mention a few things. First, you could put questions for our panelists into Q&A. Note, not chat, Q&A. And we have someone behind the scenes who will tee up questions for Nancy to ask. Second, please mark your calendars for Grandmothers Lobby Week, February 5 through 9, when we will arrange Zoom meetings with legislators by district. We hope many of you will participate. Finally, I want to thank you all for your support and activism during this, our 10th anniversary year. In the past decade, together, we've helped lobby for several important gun safety bills in Washington, including, just to mention one, the ban on assault weapons enacted in the 2023 session. This was truly a victory, and we couldn't have done it without all of you putting into action Grandmother's motto to show up, stand up, and speak up. So thank you. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Nancy Sapiro. Nancy is a lawyer and governmental relations consultant who's represented clients in Olympia since 2012. She specializes in healthcare with a focus on reproductive health and end-of-life care, as well as civil rights, human services, and economic and social justice issues. Grandmothers has benefited enormously from Nancy's well-informed strategic guidance in recent years. Nancy, thank you for all you do for our organization, for gun safety, and for moderating today's panel. Now, over to you.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. Welcome, everyone. So glad to have all of you here. A couple of quick housekeeping details before I jump in and introduce our speakers today. First, just want to let you know that this is being recorded, and I believe will be available afterwards, perhaps on the Grandmother's website. And as Suzanne said, if you have questions, do please put them in the chat. The behind-the-scenes wizards will, to the Q&A, I'm sorry. Ooh, I should listen better. To the Q&A, and the behind-the-scenes wizards will make sure they work their way to me, and hopefully I can convey some of the questions that you all may have. So with that, it is my privilege to introduce three very esteemed legislators within the Washington State Legislature. I will first start introducing each of you, and then I have a question. It's the same question for each of you. Couple of those questions, and then a few individualized questions, and then we'll see what the community wants to ask. So starting with Senator Manka Dhingra. Thank you so much for being here. Senator Dhingra is Deputy Majority Leader of the Washington State Senate. She brings 2 decades of experience as a prosecutor and behavioral health expert to her role as chair of the Senate Law and Justice Committee and member of the Senate Health and Long-Term Care Committee. She also serves on the Ways and Means Committee. In November 2017, when Senator Dhingra was elected to the Senate by the constituents of the 45th Legislative District, she became the first Sikh legislator in the nation. Since then, she has sponsored and passed legislation addressing a wide range of issues, including curbing domestic violence and sexual assault, preventing firearm violence, providing property tax relief for seniors and peoples with disabilities, prosecuting financial fraud, and reforming the criminal justice system with an evidence-based approach. She has also done extensive work in the area of behavioral health and has helped pass legislation and funding to transform our state's behavioral health system, reorienting it around prevention rather than crisis response. In addition to all of that, she continues to serve as a senior deputy prosecuting attorney with the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office. I also will add just a personal expensive note that last year she did extensive work and was a champion on the My Health, My Data bill, which protects sensitive healthcare data in the wake of the Dobbs decision, the fall of Roe. So that's my personal thank you there. So Senator Dhingra, welcome. So good to have you here. Representative Senn, good afternoon. Representative Tana Senn is the state representative for the 41st Legislative District. She chairs the Human Services, Youth, and Early Learning Committee. She's also a member of the Appropriations Committee and Innovation, Community, and Economic Development and Veterans Committees. She also serves as a member of the Joint Legislative and Executive Committee on Behavioral Health and is the co-founder of the Moms Caucus, which is a group of legislators, both moms and dads, who care deeply about ensuring our state's families are supported and given every opportunity to thrive. After earning her bachelor's degree in education at Washington University in St. Louis and her master's degree in public policy and administration from Columbia University, Representative Senn worked for 15 years in government relations and communications in the private, nonprofit, and philanthropic sectors, before she also spent time on the Mercer Island City Council. She serves as the co-president of the National Association of Jewish Legislators and is on the board of the Boys and Girls Club of Bellevue. And she also sits on the advisory board of the UW Masters in Applied Child and Adolescent Psychology program. A mouthful. And my personal point of privilege here is that it was a pleasure to work with Representative Senn back in 2017 and 2018 on the very radical idea of equal pay for women. Crazy idea. And she really spent a significant amount of time and tireless energy in getting that passed. So thank you for your efforts on that. And last but certainly not least, Senator Valdez, good afternoon. Thank you so much for being here. Senator Valdez is the proud son and grandson of farm workers and laborers, a product of public education. Senator Valdez holds a bachelor's degree in business administration from the University of Washington and a master's degree in public administration from Baruch College, the City University of New York, as a participant in the National Urban Fellows Program. Senator Valdez has worked for the city of Seattle for over 20 years, where he's led Seattle City Light's Women and Minority Business Program. He's served as a special assistant on WIMBY programs in the Seattle Mayor's Office and currently works as a senior equity and inclusion advisor with the City of Seattle Finance and Administrative Services Department. A leader in the Latino community, Senator Valdez previously served as a board member for the Washington State Hispanic Chamber of Commerce and president of Hispanic Seafair, where he empowered young Latinos and Latinas to become leaders through education and community service. He's a proud member of organized labor and has served for several years as the first president of the Washington State Council of County and City Employees, Local 21C, and previously he was a delegate to the Martin Luther King County Labor Council. Senator Valdez is vice chair of the State Government and Elections Committee, and he also serves on the Law and Justice and Transportation Committees. And my note about Senator Valdez would that he has been a passionate champion trying to address the ever-increasing problem of hate crimes and passing really thoughtful hate crimes legislation within our legislature the past few years. So Senator Valdez, thank you for being here. Okay, with that introduction, I would note that all three of our esteemed guests have earned A+ ratings from the Alliance for Gun Responsibility for their commitment, leadership, and advocacy on firearm and gun safety. So we are with a very privileged group here. So my first question to each of you, and I'll start, if I may, with you, Senator Valdez, is, we've accomplished a lot here in the state of Washington. And I'm just from your perspective, and this will be the same question for each of you, so you may have different responses. What were some of the major accomplishments of the past couple of years, and or what are you most proud of that the state of Washington has accomplished in the area of gun safety? Oh, you're on mute.
There we go. Thank you, Nancy, and hello to everyone, to all the grandmothers out there. Thank you for inviting me and my colleagues to be here. Great question, Nancy. I think for me, I think all the work that we've done these last several years, the big accomplishment was the pass of the assault weapons ban, which took a lot of years of work. I mean, I arrived in the legislature in mid-2017 during a special session, and then I remember in 2018, there was the bump stocks. 2019, I had the honor of being the prime sponsor of the ghost gun ban bill that passed. And then I teamed up with Representative Peterson on. I was his number 2 signer for all those years on the assault weapon, and I teamed up with Senator Elias on the high capacity magazine. The bill in the House. But I just think, if you had said 10, 15 years ago that we were going to accomplish all that we have, I mean, just again, I wasn't in the legislature, but I would have probably, as a voter or citizen, I would have said, boy, that's great stuff to have, but we're just don't have the courage to do it. But through years of organizing, through with the grandmothers, the alliance, and a lot of advocates came out and finally said enough is enough, that they want our communities to be safer, tired of seeing every day on the news about some tragedy. And finally a strong will from many elected officials to get that passed. But none of that would have happened without all of you being right there, right behind us, coming in to testify, showing up on the steps of the Capitol, and saying again, enough is enough. And I just think the passage of the assault weapons ban, that just took an immense amount of work, of years and years of work, but courage, and we were able to take that vote because we have the support of all of you.
I need to unmute. Thank you so much. Roxanne, I'm going to turn to you. Curious what your thoughts are about some of the accomplishments of the past few years, and to take a few moments to kvel about really the good work that Washington has done, because I do think we need to acknowledge that and recognize, as Senator Valdez said, how hard fought these were. And so share with us what some of your sort of proudest moments of the past few years were.
Yeah, thanks, Nancy. And it's great to be here with you all. If I could just take a moment of personal privilege just to mention, my aunt passed away this past week, and she was the proudest grandmother against gun violence. She lived in Chicago. She has her son at the memorial was sharing, got really engaged when RFK was killed, and led toy drives to have all the kids turn in their toy guns. And from then on and throughout the rest of her life, she was a strong advocate for gun responsibility. And so, in fact, one of the giving suggestions at her memorial was to gun violence prevention groups. So I was just so thrilled that I was going to get to speak with all of you today, so close to her passing. And I know that she's extremely honored that I am working on these issues, and was so proud, and I'm so proud of her and carrying on her work. So thank you for that, letting me take that moment, personal privilege. I guess I would say that I think one of our biggest accomplishments has been kicking the NRA's butt. I mean, they're not really a thing anymore in Washington state. It is so exciting. I mean, our opposition, I don't want to say is nominal. Our opposition is, nominal. It's really just the Republicans in the legislature. And now, I'm not saying that it makes things easy or safe or not accomplishments or not incredible, but that has just really been great. But when I started 10 years ago, I mean, to get a hearing in committee on a gun bill was a win. I kid you not. And to think about, I remember the baby steps. We got a hearing in committee, and then the next year we got it passed out of committee. And I'm not talking about the assault weapons ban. We're talking about anything to do with guns. It was just a topic we did not touch. And now we are just, going through almost best practices of gun responsibility. And, it's been with amazing colleagues like Senator Valdez and Senator Dhingra and so many others that we have just, put forth that, no, we're protecting our kids. We're protecting our communities. We are not standing back. I would also just love to put a flag in the sand for when we banned guns in the state capitol and on state capitol grounds. That, you know, I introduced that bill when there were some people who came to the legislature fully armed and were, you know, banging on the doors and trying to get in, actually, ironically, to complain to the Republicans on some action of theirs. And it was just terrifying to school groups who were visiting and to staff and legislators and citizens and lobbyists. And passing that bill to prevent open carry on our state capitol allowed us to do a number of all of these other bills that would allow you guys to come in, our citizens to come in and feel safer testifying, so they weren't being exposed to people with guns. And I think that really set a tone of, we are here, we mean business, we're going to protect everyone in the building and in this area, and who want to come and advocate. And I think that has just allowed us again to go forward with so many other bills.
Thank you, Rep. Senn. Just condolences on the loss of your aunt. I remember when those folks were sitting in the gallery and how terrifying that was to see people fully armed sitting across. And I can only imagine what that felt like for legislators down on the floor as they looked up and saw people that were armed as they were debating public policy. Senator Dhingra, turning to you, tell us a little bit about what you are most proud of, what you think some of the biggest accomplishments have been in the past session or two.
Thank you for this, Nancy, and welcome to all the grandmas. I will say, one of my favorite groups to speak in front of. You know, when you asked about, you know, all the accomplishments, you know, obviously we know the 2018 legislative session was a pivotal point when we had the majority in the Senate so that we could pass this amazing legislation. We have passed 25 gun bills in the last 6 years. 25. And these are not like chippy feel-good bills. These are huge substantive bills. You know, when I actually sat and counted them all. 25 is a huge number. You know, I've been proud of so many of the bills. Many of them have been on my list for a long time, especially the ones on gender-based violence, making sure individuals who have a history of being a danger to themselves or others, we remove guns from them. And to me, one of the most compelling data was last year when we saw suicides by guns go up all across the country. And Washington was the only state where we went down. It was by 1%, but when everyone was rising, we didn't even stay the same. We went down by 1%. And to me, that is a direct correlation to all the gun legislation we have passed. The fact that we were actually able to save lives, because we do know when a gun is involved and someone is suicidal, they use that. And so to me, that data point is very important. And, you know, we have all those amazing wins in all the 25 bills. The other one that I am very, very proud of is the Office of Firearm Safety and Violence Prevention. We do a lot of work in making sure we're addressing gun violence. And this is the office that does a lot of work in doing prevention. And one of my favorite hearings was when we were doing a law and justice hearing on the office and talking about the programs they're engaging with. And we were talking about the violence in Yakima. And for the first time, they had seen a decrease in violence in Yakima, which normally does not happen. And the extremely Republican sheriff came to the committee and said, it is because of the early intervention programs that were funded through the Office of Firearm Safety and Violence Prevention, which is huge. And to me, it is when you start talking about addressing gun violence, but also making sure we're doing preventative work, because you don't want that to occur. So I think all the amazing work that we get kudos for is amazing, but I think taking also a look at how are we reducing gun violence is really critical, especially at a time when actually violence in Washington, unfortunately, is increasing. But I think there are a lot of wins that we can be really proud of.
Great. Wonderful responses from all of you. Thank you. Okay, we're going to shift from looking back to looking forward. And I guess unsurprisingly, my question for each of you, and I'm going to start with you, Representative Senn, is what are you hoping that we can accomplish in 2024? It is a short session. We have accomplished a lot. What are you hoping to see over the 60 days of our legislative session?
Well, I will talk about the bill that I am working on because, man, I have been working on this bill for probably 8 years. And it's a very simple little bill that I've made a little bit more complicated. But I don't even know when for some reason, the Washington State Patrol is the only law enforcement agency in the entire state who is not allowed to destroy weapons. And so what happens is when they confiscate or collect weapons at a crime scene, or they are turned over, or they, come into their possession somehow, they have to either keep them, reuse them, or trade them, or sell them. And that's crazy. We want them to be able to destroy them if they don't think that they are, if they don't need them, and to keep them off the street. So the good news is we haven't passed that bill because there were so many other bills that had more impact and that were going to be more impactful, move the needle. So this one kept getting put to the side. But this year, I think, is the year we passed some of the major bills. And an added component to it is to require anyone who does a gun buyback program to destroy those weapons and not resell them, unless they're found to have been stolen and you can return them to their rightful owner or something like that. But so all guns at a gun buyback program should be destroyed. You may have seen a recent New York Times article that was talking about actually some of the companies who destroy weapons aren't actually fully destroying the weapons, but selling some of the parts. We might end up amending the bill and adding something to it requiring, not allowing that from companies if they're working in Washington. But right now, we're just focused on the actions that would allow Washington State Patrol to destroy guns, including if they do a buyback program, and everyone else also to destroy weapons in a buyback program. Let's get guns off the street.
Bill number?
Not yet.
Okay.
But Senator Lovick is going to be the companion in the Senate.
Okay, we will keep our eye out for it. Let's see, Senator Valdez, turning to you. What are you hoping that to be able to accomplish in this space, or what are you hoping to see accomplished in the 2024 legislative session?
Thank you, Nancy. I've been working on a bill now for a year or so regarding where folks can knowingly bring a weapon into certain locations. We know right now there are certain locations that folks can knowingly not bring a weapon into locations, such as a jail, a hospital, airport, those kind of facilities. And so I've been working on a bill to expand that where folks can knowingly not bring in a weapon. For example, the bill that I'm working on would expand it to a city, town, or a county's government, or government center like a city hall or a community center or parks. Could include sports facilities, swimming pool areas, etc., skateboard parks, performing arts centers, those kind of places. The bill would also expand it to transit centers, so bus shelters, stops, those kind of facilities where transit is going in and out of, or even if they lease it to other folks, that would include that. And then lastly, it would include all public buildings. So again, this would include like community centers and city halls. So I'm introduced this bill last year, knowing that last year was really just to get the word out and just start working on the bill and getting feedback and discussion. I've worked throughout the last several months with our community partners and our a lot of team members here, some of them here on this meeting today, trying to get to a place on the bill. We've met some of the stakeholders to try to work out some differences, and hopeful that I can get this bill across the finish line here in 2024. I know you're going to ask me the bill number, and the bill number is Senate Bill 5444. So pretty simple. 5444 is the number, and hopeful with support, of course, of my chair, who's here on this here, Senator Dhingra, we can get this get a hearing in committee, and then hopefully out of committee and onto the floor and over to the House. But we still have some work to do, and but I'm hopeful this is a good opportunity to get this passed.
Great. Undoubtedly, we will add that to our list, our tracking list, and doing advocacy on behalf of it. So, Senator Dhingra, turning to you, what are you hoping to see from the 2024 legislative session in the area of sort of gun responsibility and gun reform?
Thank you. I'll just say, I think it is critical that we work on policies that are avoiding our Ways and Means committee this year. I think things with large fiscal notes are going to be very, very challenging. So that is my just caution to anyone working on gun bills this session. In fact, any bills this session. I think high fiscal note is going to have a detrimental impact. Having said that, I do have a few provisos, and a lot of this is about more funding for the Office of Firearm Safety and Violence Prevention. Really making sure that we are continuing the great work that we've been doing with Harborview with a hospital-based intervention program that connects individuals who are victims of firearm violence with services and getting the trauma. I mentioned the Yakima program. It's called Walkabout, and we're kind of expanding that to other cities to make sure they have intervention programs. Community passageways was the one of the first few ones that started in King County that specifically worked with the youth who are at high risk for gun violence. A lot of the data tracking is something that I'm very focused on in making sure that we capture all the areas where gun violence occurs and really making sure we're able to map out what is happening in each different communities. As I'm sure this group already knows, gun violence really can be akin to cigarette smoking. When you grow up around cigarettes and see people smoking it, you're more likely to smoke cigarettes. Gun violence, unfortunately, is also very similar. So when you take your public health lens on this, you really got to make sure you have public health leading in addressing instances or in communities where we're seeing that. So a lot more work that's done more through the budget than through having bills. So we'll definitely have a lot of that, keeping a close eye on implementation for a lot of the great work that we have been doing. We've been hearing concerns about how not all jurisdictions are actually going out and removing guns from those individuals who have been barred from possessing guns. While King County is doing a decent job, a lot of other agencies are not. And so really making sure we are taking a look at that compliance on what the state has mandated. And the other thing I'll mention is taking a look, I'm not quite sure who will be dropping this bill, but taking a look at insurance for firearm owners, ensuring that there's a code of conduct on our people who are supplying guns and the manner in which they are engaging and behaving with our laws, making sure they are complying as needed. And so liability protection, I think, is a big component of that, and really taking a look at liability there. And then I do think the permit to purchase is a bill in the House that hopefully will be coming over, but we'll see where that is.
Great, thank you. Lots to take on in 2024. Okay, Senator Dhingra, I'm going to turn to you again. And this is a question, curious your thoughts on. We hear a lot about the Bruen decision, which came down from the United States Supreme Court in 2022, which basically struck down a longstanding public carry law. And it really has cast some doubt on gun laws around the country. And just curious, as we move forward, what your thoughts are and what sort of shadow this decision casts on our ability to make further progress in our legislative efforts here in Washington. So putting on your lawyerly hat, wondering if you share your perspective with us.
Yes, and if I may just give a little bit more background on the Bruin decision, this was in 2022, and just to get really granular on it, it struck the New York law, which had more discretion that the local authorities had in determining who needs a concealed carry permit or not the law that Washington has, which was not discretionary, but really had more of like, you shall not get it, and there were very clear criteria. So, it did overturn New York's law, not Washington. So I do want to make sure that is clear. The great concerning part of that decision was when they talked about that government must really prove that the firearm regulation is part of like this historic tradition, and that we can't really infringe on those rights if there isn't a historic tradition of doing so. That is what is extremely challenging, right? Because technology has moved so greatly, society has moved so greatly, gun violence has dramatically changed. And so for last session, I'll say a lot of our bills, when they were drafted, we were being very strategic legally on making sure we're crafting them so that if there are challenges, because there are always challenges, that we had a Bruin argument that we could make specifically for the state of Washington. And we did that on really all the laws that were passed. So we feel we're in a very good setting moving forward. But, we have to make sure, again, as we move to 2024, that we are very cognizant of this, because bad facts do make bad laws. And so I have been urging caution on, let's make sure we are very clear on our legal defenses when we pass legislation, because we don't want to have another Supreme Court decision that creates more problems. Having said that, we had a court in Texas last year that held that the court could not remove weapons from an individual who was convicted of domestic violence. And we know the correlation between domestic violence and gun violence is so strong. And so that's been going through the court system. And there was no such thing as domestic violence. No, that was not even recognized. In fact, there were many statutes who talked about, the length of the stick you could use to beat your wife. That was literally in the law. So for us to now go back and say, is there any historic precedents for removing guns from perpetrators of domestic violence? That's going to be a challenge that I don't know how the Supreme Court's going to navigate, but I actually look forward to seeing the acrobatic theater when they try to resolve that issue, because that is a very prominent issue when it comes to how you make sure you are keeping communities safe. And law enforcement will tell you that the most dangerous calls they respond to are domestic violence calls. So I think it does put our Supreme Court in a precarious situation with this case specifically. And I will tell you the fact patterns on this case are very good for people who want to address gun violence. So I think there might be opportunities to see where the Supreme Court goes with this decision. But until they hear this case and rule, I think we have to continue to be careful. I don't think we need to change what we're doing, but I think we just have to be a lot more careful in drafting our bills as we move forward.
Thank you so much for that very comprehensive answer. Moving from the Supreme Court to sort of the local level, Representative Senn, I'm going to look to you. And you, in addition to being a longtime state legislator, also served on the Mercer Island City Council for a number of years. And I'm just wondering, from your perspective, what role, if any, do you think there is for localities to try and create better protections or stronger protections than the types of protections that are available at the state level?
Yeah, thank you. As a a city council member, I'm well aware of the different resources and the different dynamic in the local areas. For instance, our city hall, small room, you come in the door, we're all just sitting there on the dais. Our police chief would attend every meeting, but that was just because he was that kind of guy who did. And, it's really intimidating when gun violence became, people became more emboldened with their weapons, when there's a very hot button issue and people are getting very emotional. It's nerve-wracking. In fact, a lot of cities have now moved to putting in bulletproof glass in front of the mayors and the legislators on the dais, or the city council members. And that doesn't seem, it's probably prudent, but it doesn't seem like what we want for our society. So after we did banning weapons in the state capitol, we also provided that same protection, banning open carry, I should say, not banning weapons, but banning open carry of weapons where there are city council meetings. And then we did the same for election workers to protect them. So you cannot bring a gun into an election, a voting center. And so that is very important to protect our election workers. If you think about the case in Georgia, and unfortunately we saw those similar situations in Washington before that bill passed, where people were being threatened and certainly intimidated. But again, that's not the kind of thing that we want to see happen. I think that the difficulty with allowing each jurisdiction to have control over gun issues is the issue of kind of traveling across the state, right? If you are in your car and you even just go through the 41st legislative district from Mercer Island to Newcastle to Bellevue to Issaquah and Sammamish, and you have your gun in your car or in your holster, this wouldn't be me, but if you do that, and you're just doing lots of shopping and each place has a different rule, it could be confusing and might create some issues in enforceability and things like that. Or if you're, again, crossing jurisdictions and the different police departments reacting differently. So I think that is going to be actually a bigger lift than some of our other issues for that very reason. A lot of times when we do policy on any issue, people prefer to have a statewide solution than to have local issues from place to place for that very reason, just to understand what is going on. But we certainly in different places see what happens. And already, so the other thing, with local control versus statewide policies, there are plenty of places where people want to feel protected and their elected officials will never vote to ban a gun. So our actions on the state level often protect people in more conservative districts that, again, their leaders would never vote to prevent open carry or guns there. And so we're kind of doing them a solid by passing it for the minority who might feel uncomfortable with guns, and it's not going to happen in their community.
Thank you so much for that. Senator Valdez, my question for you was going to be around your bill, Senate Bill 5444, and whether you had hopes for passage this year, which you have responded to. Let me just ask one. I'm looking at one of the questions in the chat is asking about whether libraries currently allow people to have guns, and if they do, would they be covered under the legislation?
Great question. 544 would ensure that libraries would now be absolutely covered as well.
Okay, great. I'm just curious from your perspective, and I think every legislator has their preference. But I'm always asked as a lobbyist, sort of, what is the most effective way for us to reach our legislators, to get our point across, And so I'm just curious from your perspective, Senator Valdez, what do you find for your constituents and people outside of your constituency, what's the most effective way for people to have their voices heard to get through to you?
For me, it's all great question, Nancy. For me, it is always being able to see all of you in person when you're out there again on the Capitol steps, rallying and demanding that we do the right thing, showing up in committee and testifying. I know Chair Dhingra, as Chair of Law and Justice, I know some of those hearings can be pretty rough because you really do hear some raw emotional testimony, and sometimes it's just not easy to hear. But it takes courage for a lot of victims and advocates to tell their story on why we need to pass certain legislation. But again, nothing compares to being there in Olympia during those hearings, whether you're in the gallery when the bills are passed is for support, but testifying and sharing why these bills need to be passed. Because when you hear it directly from those who have an impact on how these bills will affect their lives, that is absolutely just so important, so critical. So that to me is always the number one way to do that. Now, of course, I mean, we do know that because of maybe some mobility issues, not everyone can come to Olympia. But last year we expanded our hearings to include during COVID, it was kind of the trial run. But now I think all of our committees people are able to testify remotely as well. So we encourage again everyone to go up and testify. And if you are in Olympia, come visit us, come talk to us, remind us about why these bills are important, and corral us in the hallways or in the rotunda, and invite us to those rallies, outside, right there on the steps, because we'll be there.
Thank you. Great answer. Okay, some questions are coming in from our audience members, and these are just sort of open questions, and I will leave it to whomever of you would like to chime in. First one here says, we've heard about permit to purchase bill possibly coming this session. Can you explain what that would mean? How it's different from the bill passed last year, which required training and the 10-day waiting period? Anyone like to jump in on that question?
Sure, I'm happy to jump in. This is about actually getting a permit before you buy, and there people are interested in basically having a gun registry, if you will. So you basically know how many people own what number of guns. I don't think that is possible on the spectrum of where we can go. I think it gets more challenging. I do think that when you are requiring training before you purchase and doing the background checks, you are creating a database of sorts. But the permit to purchase is really actually getting a permit to purchase. And so I think we're going to see what the House can do with that bill and how far it goes. But that is the fear that a lot of our Second Amendment right folks have, is that basically we're going to end up creating a gun registry, and the permit to purchase is what's going to get us there. But and frankly, I'll tell you, there are a lot of people who actually would like to have a gun registry. I've heard from some law enforcement officers who actually want to say it'd be nice to know if we're responding to a house, how many guns are at that location. So there are safety issues, but that is a big call to gun registry. And I think the fear is that the permit to purchase will result in that. But doing the training and the waiting period, I think has been that good step to get us to permit to purchase.
And as far as the registry, would there be, I'm just going back to your earlier point about things with significant fiscal implications, would there be significant fiscal implications in creating a registry? And could that be a challenge that we might face the prospects for that this session?
We have come up with a really good online background check system. We have had multiple hearings in the Law and Justice Committee to see the progression of how that's going. So, there is technology infrastructure, especially with our background checks, that could be a potential. But I think from a political perspective, a gun registry is a very, very big lift. Doesn't mean it can't be done. We've had, like I said, 25 bills in 6 years. But, I think when it comes to technology, Washington, again, is leading internationally on what can be done with technology. And since we do have the state patrol that is responsible for all the background checks, there could be potential there.
Okay. Senator Valdez, just put you on the spot here for a second. Do you have any thoughts on how the passage of Washington laws encouraging the safe storage of firearms impacts storage practices of firearm owners? Is there evidence that these laws have made a difference?
Good question. I'm going to admit I'm not the most exact expert when it comes to safe storage. But my inclination is that absolutely. I mean, anytime you can store a weapon where a child or someone who shouldn't be having access to a gun should, to me, that saves lives. And but I guess that's probably the best that I can answer it, because but I don't have the actual newer data, which I'm sure would support that.
I will jump in and just mention that constituent, Nancy Lee, does some social marketing research, and she's a professor as well. And she just released a book, or maybe a small pamphlet, or a book, small pamphlet, or large pamphlet, on the different social marketing campaigns that have been the most effective to get people to store their weapons. As you probably remember, we passed safe storage as a crime back when we did an initiative back in 2016. Was it 2016? When we passed an initiative around that did a lot of some of the first gun responsibility laws. So it wasn't a requirement per se, but if you didn't lock up your guns, then and it was used in a crime, then you could be liable. And we've talked about requiring and I'm exploring, maybe requiring better gun locks be sold with every single piece of, any weapon or ammunition locks or cases or things like that. But again, I think that may be a marketing campaign that could end up being the most impactful. So if I can find the link, I'll put it in the chat or in the Q&A while we're talking.
And Nancy, if I can just add on,
Please.
I've spent a lot of my time as a prosecutor and someone who's worked in the behavioral health, gender-based violence field. You talk a lot about behavior modification, right? How do you change people's behavior? And criminal liability is important if a crime has occurred. I would just like to throw out to this group the thought of civil liability if it's not safe storage. That is a game changer in terms of changing behaviors, because people just don't think that a crime is going to occur if your gun isn't stored safely. But we have so many stories of individuals actually getting hurt when it's not stored safely. And so if you can attach civil liability to those actions, I do believe that could be a game changer.
Great point. Great point. Okay, open this up for anyone. Another question from our audience. We've heard that there might be a bill this session to get federal support for gun violence victims. Can anyone share any further information about that?
I'm sorry, Nancy, I was cutting and pasting. Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
Sure, of course. And then I was going to say, Senator Dhingra, it looked like you were trying to speak, but you were on mute. So the question is, we have heard that there might be a bill this session to get federal support for gun violence victims. Can anyone share any information about that? And it looked like Senator Dhingra was attempting to say something. So we'll go to you, and then Rep. Senn or Senator Valdez, if you have anything to add.
Thank you. I'll just say I'm just so proud of the fact that we have that Office of Firearm Safety and Violence Prevention, because having that office actually makes it so that we can access federal dollars in a much more efficient way, because we have that entity that goes after federal dollars. So we have actually done that in the past as well. We'll continue to do so, but that office really sets us up to be able to react very quickly to any federal grants. And I know that President Biden announced a national, at the federal level, having an Office of Farm Safety and Violence Prevention. I just want to say Washington was first. But we do have that infrastructure where we can leverage federal dollars. And so I'm always very excited to see how we can do that.
Anyone else have any thoughts they'd like to share on that? Okay. So here's a question from the audience, and I'm going to add a little bit on to it. The question is, are there any areas where Republicans will support gun bills? The line seems to be very clearly drawn between parties. So that's their question. I'm going to add on to it. Oftentimes I get questions about how do I talk to my legislator if we have like very clearly differing views on a topic? And I'm just curious, when people come to visit you and they have very different beliefs than you do on a particular policy, what's effective, at least as far as engaging in conversation with that person? What are some tips perhaps that you think are helpful that people can take with them when they are having conversations with their legislators who, may not agree with them on some of these gun issues? So open that up to anyone. You can answer the question from the audience, my question, whatever you prefer.
So I can talk about our Republican colleagues. I know the House is different than the Senate. The one that they struggled with greatly, and they said so on the floor, was a bill that Senator Solomon had, and it was an idea actually that the Republican sheriff had brought to the Law and Justice Committee, and that was giving law enforcement the authority to actually petition on behalf of a victim of domestic violence to get a protection order and remove guns from the home. And again, it's because law enforcement knows those are the toughest cases to respond to. And we had Republican colleagues, like I remember Senator Wagner saying, this is a good bill. It's victim safety, Second Amendment, victim safety, Second Amendment. He literally said that on the Senate floor and then said, I have to err on Second Amendment. And so he's going to vote no. But you could see that challenge that bill posed, because it was a recommendation from law enforcement. It was about protecting the lives of survivors, and it had all the judicial protection that you would need to make it constitutional. And yet they chose to protect the Second Amendment rather than protect the life of a victim. The second time that they actually voted was not on a gun bill, but it was actually on the Blake case. So this is where I will tell you that our federal laws say very clearly that if you have evidence of using a controlled substance, you actually don't have a right to possess a gun. A controlled substance is used as it says marijuana in the federal statute. And so we had the big Blake bill, that was our drug possession case. And I had offered an amendment twice, because it was in two different sections, that if there's indication that you have used marijuana, you will lose your right to possess a firearm. I had Republicans vote for that amendment because that is a federal law. And so Senator Padden had said on the floor that that is the law, and I guess that is what we're going to have to do. So I'd done an amendment about the notice of ineligibility to possess a firearm. So it was more about the notice that's provided in that circumstances, but that was the only time I remember my Republican colleagues voting for that. And I still take that as a win.
Senator Dhingra, in this last session, Rep. Davis's bill, I believe there were a couple things around guns and domestic violence that went through quite seamlessly, if I recall. Because I remember the conversation, it was surprising that the bill was very much presented as a domestic violence bill and not a gun bill. And so oftentimes we have a whole list of things that are gun bills. And then this bill had many, many components, and but it was focused on domestic violence, and it never even made it to the list of gun bills, even though it had some gun protections in them, because honestly, the Republicans were okay with them, because they were basically like, kind of what the Supreme Court they have before the Supreme Court now, that if you are convicted of domestic violence, you should have your gun taken away or kept away, I think was the change. And I think they just didn't make hay out of it. But I think that's the only time I've seen.
Yeah, and I'll double check on the Senate whether they voted for it, but traditionally, the domestic violence bills in the Senate have been nonpartisan because there's been a lot of the gun stuff in those bills. But I will double check on Rep. Davis's bill. That might be one where she got that, but I'll double check.
Yeah, interestingly, back in 2000 and something, the 8 years ago when I introduced that bill that I mentioned about destroying the weapons or allowing Washington State Patrol to destroy weapons, I had 2 Republicans who signed on to the bill. I had it as a Republican co-sponsor, so the second person on my bill. But by the time I got to the floor, they no longer were interested in voting for it. I think they got some flack from their caucus, but because they were law enforcement, and they knew that every other law enforcement agency already had the right to destroy weapons, and furthermore, the sheriffs and police chiefs who testify, have testified for that bill, is they don't want to sell a weapon that could be used against their own police officers, let alone the community. And, and even if they, let's say, make a few $100s by selling the weapon, the amount of cost of any crime, just the very first minute you answer, 911 call, you've already spent more money than it was worth getting that gun, both probably in my opinion, but also in fact of how expensive crimes are. So anyway, that was back in 2015, 16, and I have not since seen anything like that.
And I actually stand corrected, because there was a trailer bill to the background check that was bipartisan. And that was really to make sure that it was more convenient for our businesses who are selling guns and others to be able to do that background check. So I stand corrected that there are a few that we've had some support on, but I will say it is very challenging. And going back to your second question, Nancy, what I'll say is I take meetings from a wide variety of individuals, because I think it is important as legislators to make sure you're not in an echo chamber. And to me, what I have always appreciated is a respectful discourse. You can have differing views, but if you come and talk to your legislature about your experience and what's been happening, and being able to identify a problem and identify a solution, I think those conversations go well. I think many times it's very interesting to see how people engage. So I think it is important to go to all electeds, not just the ones who you think or know will support your bill and your position. I think that creating that relationship, having that relationship is critical. I will say, as chair of Law and Justice, I actually have a good relationship with the guy who's from the NRA. They do give me an F rating, which is the only F grade I've ever been proud of, the only F grade I've ever gotten. But we have a great relationship in the sense of he will call me, he'll tell me who they want to present on bills, who the panels are, and I do the same courtesy. So we have a good line of communication. We disagree on the policy. And there are times when he will flag legitimate issues, right? He's like, this is a barrier. This is something that can't happen. And I'm always happy and receptive to that, because we do want to pass bills that are implementable.
Good policy.
That is good policy, that are effective. And if there truly is a problem, you want to be able to fix that problem. So I will say, please have conversations with everyone. Those conversations are critical. I'll also say, please email. It is imperative. I know we get 1,000 emails a day when we're in session. But those things are important. That communication is important.
And again, you have, grandmothers, you just have such an unbelievable kind of power and presence as a grandmother. I think it's such a veneered position that coming in and really sharing as a grandmother, you're concerned for your grandkids. As a grandmother, you're concerned for the community. As a grandmother, what you have seen over the years or experienced, the pain that you have felt or seen, witnessed. It's I always say that it's the lobbyists who bring in the numbers, the facts, and it's the constituents who bring in the stories that we remember in our hearts, so that when we're voting on something, we're remembering, we're feeling the memory. Again, we can get handed a piece of paper, we can write down the bill number, the facts, that when the report is due, but it's the stories, it's your emotional connection that really makes a difference. So if you know that the legislator is into horses, and for some reason one of the grandmothers has a connection to a horse, even if it's not related to guns, like have that person speak, or just building the relationship to get them to get their ear. Frankly, if they really disagree with you, the chances of you getting a meeting in the first place are probably slim, sadly. But again, I think that is really just that, being obviously respectful and just sharing and being as honest and personal as you can be.
Great. Well, thank you all so much. We are actually past time. I just so appreciate each of you being here today. I know how busy all of you are trying to get things done before session begins. I think this was a really meaningful and rich conversation. So appreciate all of you being here and participating. To all of you, I just want to remind you, legislative session begins on January 8th. It's going to go by very quickly. It's 60 days. I'm sure you can go to the Grandmother's website to find out the bills that we'll be working on and advocating on behalf of. Lobby Day, or Lobby Week, actually, is February 5th through 9th. And I think you can go to the website to get more information on that. And with that, I will sign off. Say again, deep felt thanks for your participation, and hope you all have a wonderful day and wonderful holidays.
Thank you all.
You too. Thanks so much, Nancy, and everybody.
Thank you.